It would be kind of crazy to do an entire Craftsy class on frostings and not show you at least one cake covered in icing. So here I have a pre-filled 4-layer yellow cake that I have filled with my passion fruit Italian meringue buttercream. And using the Italian meringue buttercream that we just made, I'm gonna show you one of my favorite techniques for covering a cake. The first thing you want to do, if you're not accustomed to holding something kind of heavy in your hand like this for a few minutes, is to anchor your elbow into your hip. That's going to give you a little bit of stability when you start icing the sides of the cake. So what I'll do now is just hold this in my palm and scoop up some buttercream on the back side of an offset spatula. I try to get the buttercream on the very top of the spatula. And what I'll do now is I will just press it into the side of the cake and scrape down and kind of scrape to the side. And then I'll rotate the cake a little bit in my hand. Again, pick up a fair bit of buttercream with my spatula parallel to the side of the cake, press the buttercream into the cake, scrape down, and then with the excess, just kind of windshield wiper it over more of the side of the cake. Rotate a little bit and keep going around and around. Press it in, scrape down, windshield wiper. So what's nice about the technique of pressing the buttercream onto the sides of the cake before you put it on a turntable is that it's actually a way that you can cover a cake in icing without using a turntable. As you can see, since I have icing all over the sides, from here I could kind of just smooth this out. But since I have a turntable, I'll make my life a little bit easier and just put the cake down right in the center. I have a piece of tape there already to help keep my cake nice and secure. Now to cover the top of the cake, I'm just gonna put a couple of really big dollops of buttercream on top of my cake to cover the top and fill in on the sides. I always add way more buttercream than what I want on my cake because it's easier to shave excess buttercream off than keep reapplying more and more. So don't go skimpy on this, just go for it. So now what I'm doing is I'm just gonna kind of spread that giant mass of buttercream over the top of my cake till it's relatively smooth and allow the excess to push off the sides. And what that'll do is it'll allow me to kind of infill any of the tops of the cake that I didn't already cover with buttercream when I worked on the sides. I'll just kind of fill in any little holes on the sides or at the very top of the cake where I didn't already have buttercream. Okay, so now that I have a good layer of buttercream on the sides and the top of my cake, I'm gonna work on smoothing everything out. So what I'll do is I'll put my offset spatula aside and switch to a metal bench scraper. So now with my bench scraper, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this very flat surface and set it right on top of my cake turner so that it's also flat. And make sure that this part of the bench scraper is straight up and down. That way I can't have anything but a perfectly straight-sided cake. I'll keep this bench scraper on a bit of an angle so that if I were to try to kind of put my finger in between the cake and the bench scraper, I could probably get almost my fingertip into that little area. And then from here, I'm just gonna slowly turn my cake and scrape away the excess. If this was a cake that I planned on covering in fondant, I would of course want it to be perfectly round because when you cover a cake in fondant, everything that you see in the cake really kind of comes out. So you want it to be absolutely perfect. So what you could do, again, when you're covering a cake with fondant, because you're covering with fondant, you only need a really thin layer of buttercream. So you can use the base cardboard that your cake is sitting on as your guide. And if you line this corner up of your bench scraper with the edge of that cardboard, the cardboard is what's gonna dictate the shape of your cake. And if your cardboard's perfectly round, so will your cake. So I'm just gonna go around and shave away the excess. And once I start to get a bit of buildup on my bench scraper, I'll put it right back in the bowl. If you plan on doing this as a crumb coat, or you wanna make sure that your cake is absolutely perfect and shows no crumbs whatsoever, you might wanna scrape your excess into a different bowl, but because I'm just going to cover this all in the same buttercream and it doesn't matter to me too much if there's maybe a crumb here and there, I'm just gonna use the same bowl. So once you've kind of straightened your sides, if you have any holes where you might need a little bit more buttercream, just go ahead and do a little patchwork. Spread a little bit in some of these little spots, and then you'll just go right back with your bench scraper and shave away any of the excess. So I'm gonna go around my entire cake, put a little bit more than what I need, and smooth this out. So now let's work on perfecting the top of our cake. Back to my offset spatula. I'm gonna put it on a little bit of an angle. It's probably about a 45-degree angle, tipping up towards me. Again, I always sort of use my fingertip as reference in terms of how much to angle my bench scraper or my offset spatula. So if I tip this up a little bit and I can just kind of put the tip of my finger in just like that, then I have it at a good angle. So now what I'll do is I'll make sure that the bend in my offset spatula is not directly over the center of my cake. I want it to be slightly inward so that my spatula is covering more than just half the cake on an angle. And I'm gonna slowly turn the cake away from me and scrape this, shaving away any of the excess buttercream until I have a perfectly flat, smooth surface. I'll go back and do it a little bit more. Until it's perfectly flat. Go over the center a little bit. Now we'll clean up the edges and we're done. So one more time around the sides, what I'll do is I'll take this little lip of excess buttercream, scrape it away. Some of it will kind of push up, and then I can clean off the edge and get a really sharp corner on my cake. So back to this original angle. I'm over here on this side of my cake when I use an offset spatula. You could also use your bench scraper for this process. Go all the way around. And go all the way back around, making sure that I have a super smooth cake. All right, now is the moment of truth. We're going to scrape the very little tiny bit of buttercream left on the edge of your cake off. Sometimes when cake decorators do this, if you don't have a ton of experience, it might seem a little tricky, or you might be kind of nervous about how to get that edge without totally destroying it. And one thing I want to stress is that the motion is simply pulling a spatula towards you. You don't want to try to shape it by curving the spatula around the edge. You're just pulling towards you. So what I do is I have my spatula in one hand and I put my index finger on the tip of the other end of my spatula, and I hold the spatula about the level of the top of the cake, a few inches away from the edge of the cake, on that same angle that I had it on when I was doing the top of my cake. All right, so just like this, I've got my spatula floating in the air, and I'm simply just going to pull this towards myself, clean that edge. When I get to the middle of the cake, lift up and off. I'll do it again. Spatula about the height of the cake, fingertip here. I'm not pressing down, I'm just creating a little bit of stability. Pull my spatula towards me, middle of the cake, lift up. Always scrape the edge of the spatula clean before you do the next edge. One more time. And then once you get the hang of this, you can go a little faster. So there we have it, a perfectly smooth, straight-sided frosted layer cake.